Hello, my name is Michael Crosby. I'm an associate professor of GIS and remote sensing at Louisiana Tech University, and I was part of this removing bottlenecks that impact forest harvests in Mississippi, mainly to support SWGOT and some of his the acquired and analysis of the spatial information. And this is going to be a recording of sort of a zoomed in version of the analysis that we did using network analysis in ArcGIS Pro. So if you want to pause it and loop back and sort of see how things were clicked and allocated and put in place, this will be here for you. It'll be part of another the webinar recording and the slideshow that we'll have there that'll talk about how specifically where some of the data came from. The assumption that this is going to make, before I get my mug off the screen, is that you already have the FIA data for harvest locations, and that you've already acquired the sawmills, and I'll talk about the buffering process, but that you've already acquired the impediments, the bridges or roads or whatever you might be using as part of the analysis. And again, this is just to see, or just so you'll have a resource to fall back on for doing the actual analysis. So I'll share my screen with you, and you'll be looking at ArcGIS Pro with all of the data that SWGOT Atreya had found, downloaded, and got ready for this analysis that we were doing. The first thing that we'll look at here, and the first thing that's being a harvesting project and products project, is the sawmills. These are the pine sawmill locations in Mississippi. Combination of the RISI database and Mississippi Forestry Commission. We got all this together, geocoded the locations for all these mills. After we did that, we assumed a wood basket of 50 miles. So we buffered each of these points for 50 miles, and I'll spare you turning them all on one at a time. We made another layer that we used as the study area. That's the intersection of all these polygons that were created with the lines dissolved. The intersecting lines are dissolved. So you're looking at one contiguous study area. Notice here, and I've left it zoomed out for the moment, that it catches parts of southern Tennessee, eastern Alabama, northeast Louisiana, and the Florida parishes, and just a very tiny sliver here of southeast Arkansas. And I left the topographic base map on so you can kind of see visually where some of the streams and the road networks and some of that are located. The other data sets, I'll turn them on one at a time and then turn them all on together. So again, this is assuming you've gotten this already and have it in ArcGIS Pro. But the other stuff here, the other data sets here, are the harvest locations. And this came from the FIA data, and there should be some R code and sort of a brief methodology that we'll go through in the slideshow that'll kind of talk you through how to get that data. The other thing was bridges, and the bridge data, if you've seen SWGOT's thesis yet or read the thesis, if not, it'll be in the presentation too. There are a lot of bridges in Mississippi, and I think a lot of states have the same problem. There are not a lot of bridges that have posted weight limits that are posted. At least in the database. I mean, there may be a sign at the bridge for these 3,000-ish bridges in the state, but they don't all have weight limits associated with them. So we were only able to use the ones that had the weight restrictions. And this is what that data set looks like. I'll turn off those sites. So here are the bridges, and we use state and federal resources here to get these bridge locations. And it may not necessarily be exhaustive because, again, we didn't have weights for all of the bridges. This is just the bridges that had posted weights associated with them. So you can see it like a used dartboard here. There are the sawmills in black, the harvest locations that look like trees, and the bridges that are these brown dots that are everywhere. So sort of the purpose of doing this is to give you something you can look at that's sort of zoomed in and detailed, and hopefully a resource for you if you set this up yourself. Um, so what we did was looked at an individual sawmill and harvest site. So the sawmill we're going to look at is in Southwest Mississippi, where there's a pretty good bit of interest over here with some harvest with pellets and things like that. Um, and this particular mill, and then again, just to kind of put it in context, there's all the mills, and there are a bunch of pine saw mills in Southwest Mississippi, but specifically we're going to focus on this one. And one of its associated harvest sites. And I'll turn on this buffer here and kind of zoom in and give you an idea of where we are in Southwest Mississippi. So here's Port Gibson and Natchez, if you're familiar with this area. The Homestead National Forest is south of us, and here's Jackson here, Vicksburg. So what we will do here is create a network data set or an analysis data set to focus our work. And what I use, or what I'm going to use in this case, is just harvest site 13. And there's nothing special about the numbers. It's arbitrary the way it comes out of the FIA data. So what you need to do here is, from your harvest sites, you want to look at analysis and network analysis. A word about this: we used, in our case, ArcGIS Online's network layer. And if you have an ArcGIS Online subscription, you should be able to use this if you go through data source there. There are others you can use. You can purchase them or leverage them, maybe OpenStreetMaps or something, or you can create your own. But be aware that the things that you need here are the roads, and you need a direction of travel, so north, south, east, west, that kind of thing, and a hierarchy. So where there's an overpass, it has to know that one is on top or below another. Otherwise, it may treat it as an intersection, and the shortest road distance here may be a right turn where there is no exit. So using this ArcGIS.com's or Esri's network for our analysis helped us avoid some of these problems of trying to create this on our own. A few different ways you can do this, and these are the options that you'll see when you look at the network analysis function. You can look at routes. This is the shortest path between stops, and this is what I'll use first. I'll show you another option in a minute, but if you want to see what the shortest of all of them is, you'd want to use closest facility, and we'll look at that in a minute. So route is start to stop. If you put 10 harvest sites with one mill, it's going to go from one harvest site to another and use the mill as the terminus. So it won't do 10 different locations to one location. That would be closest facility. But here we're going to look at route, and just click route. It's going to create that analysis layer. And in parts of this in a minute, I'll kind of show you how this works and then show you the result of it I've done already. Because I can't feel all the dead time while it does some of the analysis, particularly for the closest facility. But for this one route and a smallish area like this, it sets up pretty quickly. Once you get your route analysis layer in, it'll have stops, routes, point barriers, line barriers, and polygon barriers. The stops, these are your harvest locations and mills in this case. The routes are going to get generated, and the barriers would be like bridges, roads, or hazard areas that needed to be avoided, for example, or maybe wetlands that you couldn't take hazardous material through, or something to that effect. But everything you do here is going to be from the Network Analyst ribbon. So if you click on that Route tab, you'll see a few options, and the order here is not going to matter a whole lot as long as you've as long as you do this before you click run. And if you forget, you can redo it and click run again. Um, Before though I get to that, if you mess up and click run, note that every time you run this, your organizational account will have credits attached to it, and every time you run it, it's going to use some of those credits. Um, it may not matter if you're at a bigger place and you've got a lot of credits available. It's probably not going to hurt you, but if you run low or run out, you can purchase more, or um, use a smaller area, kind of. And just be aware that this will use credit. So if you get in here playing around, it's somebody from your organization may email you and ask you what you're doing and tell you to stop. But first, we need to set up our parameters for our travel. And what I've used, it's going to give you all these anyway, the information here, but we're interested in distance here. So I'm going to change it to distance, and then I want to look at the settings to show you some of the things that are available. So we launched travel mode properties, and you want to make sure you're in travel mode and that you're looking at the restrictions. And the restrictions here they're going to be important because depending on where you are, your state's going to have a different weight limit on its roads. What we looked at here was using Mississippi's, and the tonnage weight limits, you'll have to convert to kilograms. So in the case of Mississippi, it's weight restrictions. You turn on the restriction and then add the value here is 26,149 kilograms, and it'll tell you here kilograms. So what you're doing here is telling it to restrict travel if the road in the network has a limit. So if it doesn't allow 25,000 kilograms, if that's the limit on some of these smaller roads, then you're going to way too much. So it's not going to use anything below that number. Some of the other ones that we turned on were driving a truck, just to prohibit trucks on some of these roads. We wanted to avoid limited access roads. We have truck with trailer restrictions, so we set that at 1. And should avoid truck restricted roads. So if there's anything else on here that, for your purpose, you wanted to add as a restriction, you could turn those things on. If there's a height restriction that you're aware of, for example, the height of the vehicle, you could enter it in meters. If there's a clearance or something, they move things besides timber. If you're moving engines for planes or something that you see come through on the low boys, sometimes they could turn that on. But once you've got these set, hit OK, and it'll return you to here. Then you've got to import your stops, and these are your inputs. And the only two inputs we have looking at single routes are going to be our harvest site 13, Y, and our sawmill, that in this case is number 11. And you can hit apply or OK in this case because we're done. If you hit OK the first time, just go back to import stops. But when you hit OK here, it's going to take it a second, and what you'll see is numbers. So 1 and 2, if you caught that popping up here. So this will be our start and this will be our stop. So we're going in numerical order, so to speak. And once you get this done, you're done, right? You've got your travel settings done and your stops are in. So this first step here, click run, and you'll see to the right there your geoprocessing pane should open, and it's going to give you a sort of a progress report. It'll tell you pretty quickly, at least in this case, small distance, 2 points. It was done pretty quickly, but it'll take it a minute to build that route, and you'll see it pop up in just a second. There's the purple line, and then you see the little cursor circle in there. What it's doing now is building the geometry and the attribute table. And once that's done, the thing that I've started to do and talk to Scott about was you can either open the attribute table for your routes here and find your distance. There's total kilometers, 22.8, let's say, kilometers. You can write that down and forget about it and move on. Or, so that you keep these things, you can export it as a feature class. So if you right click on routes and move down to data and export features, I'll use the same naming convention as Swagat did, and it was harvest area 13 to meal 11, and hit OK, and it'll create a feature class of that route, and there that is right there. Give it a second to finish doing its thing, and I'll turn this off and show you that the route's real. And there you go. And this just gives you a way to make sure that you're cataloging the differences, because every time you run this, it's going to reroute. Right? So now we want to look at the bridges, and in our case, the restricted bridges in this area, there they all are. So these are the restricted bridges that had weight postings. And I'll turn that off so it looks a little less busy, but what we want here is back to our analysis layer. We want to import here in inputs. It'll say input barriers or input point barriers, and click that little drop down if you have different geometries. But we're going to input point barriers, and this is going to be our sawmill 11 restricted bridges. And you hit OK, and it's going to build all of those in. So what these red dots mean, and I'll zoom in here, you'll notice there are 2 bridges that this route crosses of that 22.78 kilometers to get from this harvest location to the sawmill. So what we'll do is rerun this now and sort of see what it's going to do here. I don't want to spoil this, but I know what happens. So I'm trying to zoom in so you see this route, and I've left this other layer on so you'll see the original one anyway. And look, so there it is. And if I go look at the after effects, again, we're building that geometry, then it's updating the attribute table. Once that's done, again, I would export this as its own layer. We'll show you that again. If you right click on routes and data, export the feature, you can build the feature class. And I would call this one something like HA13 to meal 11 alternate. And once that feature gets created, we'll look at the difference. And we can just open this attribute table and go and look at the difference in distance given the rerouting because of the posted bridges there. Just look at this one, maybe. There we go. So now we're at 46.5 kilometers. So we were at 22.8, and now we're at 46.5. So we've pretty well doubled our travel distance because of these weight restricted bridges. This doesn't mean that these bridges aren't crossable. They just aren't crossable by these trucks because they weigh too much. And this is, you guys are probably aware in your own states, some of the infrastructure and some of the more rural locations throughout the country are sort of suffering right now. And this is going to become one of the fallouts of it, is having to reroute traffic. So if we go back up here and turn this off and change one of the symbologies here to just give it a little bit different color. So this would be the difference, right? So we're leaving our location and getting to the sawmill versus this big swing around. And I'll zoom in here. So the truck restricted roads, in the case of Mississippi, this would include the federal trace, so the Natchez Trace Parkway. So what it's doing here is going around because it's illegal for it to go up. So this would be what we would want to see in our just route to route or point to point routing of best guess there for not having any problems, and kind of as the crow flies. And then we introduce these impediments for these bridges that we can't get to, and then we have to go around the world to get next door, so sort of thing. The other way that you can do this, and again, I won't set this one up again because I'll be talking through some dead time, but if we had all of our Sawmill 11 study sites, let me zoom back out here so you can see them. So these are all our harvest areas. We use that as our analysis layer. You would want to use closest facility. And if you do that, it will set up something like this. And I've done this already, so forgive me for that. It's going to be a thing where you'll set up your facilities. This, in my case, this is going to be your destination. So this is my sawmill, and my incidents, the things that I'm going towards the facility with, are going to be my harvest sites. And you run it, and you get all these distances to the sawmill. Right? And I have all of those here. So there's that shortest distance between 13 and 11 here, and here's all the rest. If we include the impediments, right, those out bridges or posted bridges, then we wind up with this, where you can see that every one of the, or not every one, but a lot of these harvest sites had to reroute. In the attribute tables, again, they'll have all of that information in it. It'll tell you harvest area number, and it'll give you those distance values to it. So there's our 46.8, and this is some of the afters, and then you want to see the sort of the befores. So this is no impediments: 81, 120, 22, 49, 95, 83, 98, and there's the afters. So, probably the easier way to do this, certainly the way that we had Swagat doing it, was one at a time, because it gave us a way to look at any mistakes that might have happened. In one case, we would have it try to jump on the Natchez Trace, let's say, and that's how we would figure out we need to set the restriction to stay off truck restricted roads and that kind of thing. So it gave us a little more control in the case of thesis. But that would be it for just getting the data in, the analysis done using Network Analyst, and we'll again use this as sort of a tutorial. There'll be some documents that'll come with the seminar materials, and we'll have we'll have a slideshow as well. We kind of go through how we got the data and got it cleaned up and ready for analysis. And certainly, if you have any questions, hopefully you can see the screen here. If I stop sharing, maybe you can see the screen that has my email address on it. You're welcome to email me. I'll be happy to help any way I can. But that'll be it. And thanks very much for listening, and good luck with your analysis.